Good evening, and thank you for joining us from around the country and those following this live event on our online platforms in the diaspora. From the Manu Chindaria Center for Performing Arts at the University of Nairobi, welcome to the 8th edition of the Nation Leadership Forum series. I'm Dennis Sokari, your moderator for tonight. We are discussing security. The country now has a new Inspector General of Police, Hilary Mutyambai, whose entry is full with high expectations from Kenyans. Now, last week, during the State of the Nation address, President Uhuru Kenyatta submitted to Parliament a report on the state of security 2018. This comes on the backdrop of a myriad of security challenges the country faces, from economic crimes to learning curves from terrorist attacks, and we will have a deep look into our level of preparedness in dealing with security threats in the country, both internally and externally. What are the real issues and what are the pressing challenges, and how can the country move forward so that you and me feel safe while going about our businesses and enjoy the freedoms enshrined in the Constitution? Tonight, we will look at terrorism, youth and de-radicalization, internal security and surveillance. All that is up for discussion tonight, and as a tradition, this is a town hall style debate, and we have a panel of 4 to help drive this. Now, to our panel, left we have a gentleman, 3 gentlemen. We have a lady, and unfortunately, CS Fred Matiang'i, who's the Interior Cabinet Secretary, has issued his apologies, wasn't able to make it for this event, but he's very well represented by Ambassador Martin Kimani, who is the Director of the National Counterterrorism Center. A round of applause for him. And we also have Dr. Fatuma Ahmed Ali, who is an Associate Professor of International Relations at USIU School of Humanities and Social Sciences. Dr. Ali is an expert in matters of countering violent extremism. Let's give a round of applause. Let us also welcome Nicholas Mulila, who is the Chief Corporate Security Officer at Safaricom. Last but not least, also on the panel is Dr. Mutuma Rutere, Director, Center for Human Rights and Policy Studies. He is an expert on issues of human rights and security. You can follow this conversation on our social media platforms with the hashtag @Nation Leadership Forum. Without any further ado, let's get straight to the business of the night, shall we? Now, to our panel. There's an issue that has been widely discussed in the country, and last week the President launched the National Integrated Identity Management System, Huduma Number as we are all calling it, and dismissed a number of narratives, including it's not to follow up Mpango wa Kando. He also mentioned that it's not the mark of the beast, as some religious leaders were alluding to. I will throw this question to Ambassador Martin Kimani. Why is this Huduma Number necessary? We have identity cards, driving licenses, we've got NHIF, NSSF, we have all these cards and all these numbers. Why is Huduma Number so important?
Thank you, Dennis, and it's great to be here. And I want to apologize on behalf of CS Matiang'i, who really wanted to be here, but a security engagement kept him away. On the Huduma Number, my understanding is that we are trying to have a single number that combines your entire identity vis-a-vis the government. At the moment, all those separate documents that you spoke about mean that it is very difficult to correlate and match different aspects of service delivery or the attempt to compromise service delivery using all those numbers. So with a single number, we can arrive at all the various service delivery options for you. It's similar to the United States having a social security number, which is a number that follows you throughout your life and that you use in multiple environments, including your workplace. And it makes it very easy for the American government to understand the services that it's delivering to you and how that's doing. From the security perspective, it is also very important. Kenya has undertaken over the last few years a process of strengthening the integrity of our government systems so that we make it more difficult for criminals and terrorists to masquerade as legitimate and legal Kenyans. And so this, again, is a continuing trend of reform that delivers service and security. And from what I know at the moment is already millions of Kenyans have gotten their Huduma numbers, and millions more are continuing to stream into the offices of assistant chiefs. And I think one of the things that the government is very proud about is that this is an initiative led by Kenyans, this is a tool built by Kenyans, and it is an initiative of Kenyans, and it's specifically meant to improve how the government serves its citizens.
I mean, it was just rolled out last week, but I'll ask any four of you, has anyone registered yet?
I haven't registered yet, but I'm usually a latecomer to these things, but I'll definitely be there this coming week.
Mr. Nicholas, have you registered?
I haven't registered yet. I've not registered yet, but I can confirm that I'll be registering. And I think just to add on to what Ambassador is saying, I think that one specific number of identity will be very, very important, even for the private sector. We get to a point where we want to know our customers properly, and the Huduma number, I'm sure, is going to be very, very, very critical for us.
Dr. Fatma?
No, I have not registered, but I'm on it.
Okay.
Probably in the next 2 days, I'll be registered.
Okay. Mr. Nicholas?
It's Rutere.
Yes.
Not yet, but I think the conversation about the Huduma number is actually very good in an open democracy. So all those concerns, issues being raised, they're part of what this kind of deliberative democracy is all about. So it's a good thing that we're having this conversation.
Sorry, it was Mutuma Rutere. It's because my next question is to Mr. Nicholas. But before I go there, we can't move beyond this number without really looking at the fears that many Kenyans have. I mean, this unique card shall be used in virtually all spheres of life, including accessing banks, medical covers, and other government services, making the sensitive information prone to vulnerabilities of cybersecurity. How can you assure Kenyans that the information they're putting into and that will be included in this number will not be shared, or someone will not take advantage and access this information for whatever reason? Mr. Ambassador first.
Well, let me point to a report that's just come out, I think from the Brookings Institute, if I'm not wrong, that talks about MPESA. And it says that MPESA has two great virtues in terms of regulation. One, it is highly regulated, and at the same time, it is very open to new innovations coming into it. And I'm not speaking for Safaricom, but what I'm trying to say is that Kenya at this point has had sufficient experience in securing people's information. And I think that is a trend that is going to continue. Now, it is okay, as Dr. Rutere said, for there to be a debate. We are a democracy, and Kenyans have a right to know what's happening to their information. So the issue of privacy is very important, but it's an issue that the government is highly conscious of. And I think by having one number that integrates the various documents, we're actually going to see an increase in security from all the different numbers that were sometimes liable to compromise, bribery, and corruption. Now, it doesn't mean that it's going to be 100%. There's never 100% when it comes to digital security. But the systems are being put in place, have been put in place, and I think Safaricom is a good example of that.
Nicholas, you handle digital security at Safaricom, and you're managing millions and millions. And in terms of infrastructure, how do you think this will work out? And because there are fears in the country that could a system be hacked by people or malicious and access this information? The other one is, are we going to have a slowdown of the systems once everybody rolls in and someone trying to access? Currently, there's some government websites, when you try to access them, you can't go beyond your login. I mean, in terms of infrastructure, how do you think this information can be protected, and do we have those capacities?
Thanks, Dennis. So I think before I get to answer your question, I just want to go back to what we look at in Safaricom. Currently, we have about 30 million customers. And that means we have 30 million points of weakness, yeah, where our systems can be hacked. I think that's the first thing. We do have about 24 plus a million MPESA customers. That's another 24 million points of weakness. What then that means is that we have to continue to invest very heavily in terms of the infrastructure. We have to continue to build very, very strong security controls just around the systems. But most importantly, the biggest threat is always going to be your internal threat. The people who have access to that system, the people who have authority to access the systems. And I think Ambassador and team, of course, I would imagine they will be looking at how the system will be accessed. They are going to look at the people who should actually have authority to have access to that NIMS database. From our point of view, yes, we continue to invest very, very heavily just to protect our systems. We also do have a 24/7 monitoring center for not only cyber security, but also for MPESA transactions. So we are online throughout every day of the year. And in terms of just trying to drive security for the NIM system, I would be expecting that government will be looking at, just ensuring that we have the right capacity for the system that we do have. One of the biggest challenges that organizations face, and especially in the corporate sector, is where we allow people to access data, and therefore you find that we will have very, very strong policies around how data is requested, how data is accessed, and how data is released, within the legal framework. And I would be expecting the same, with the new system. I think if then they put together that particular system, obviously the next thing is then to look at the particular points, and especially the third parties who will be accessing this system, because that again becomes a big point of weakness, for citizens' data. And basically what keeps me awake is just the imagination that one day I can wake up and find all your data out there in the internet or in public. And therefore, I'm expecting Ambassador and team will be doing exactly the same just to protect the system.
We will get to the usability of the same. Let me throw a question to Mr. Rutere. From a human rights perspective, the courts are saying stop, don't force people to do this. And there are those who are saying that, we have our rights enshrined in the Constitution. I have a right to keep some private information. I don't have to give this information to the government. Where then do we draw the line? Because already this is going on.
Well, thank you, Dennis. I think the substantive issues have been addressed partly by the court, although not on the merits. But I think the broader discussion is really about the privacy of data, because when you collect a lot of data, whether it's by the private sector or the public sector, there's a whole question about how secure that data is, who has access to that data, what kind of layers of protection do you build, how long do you keep that data? People are talking about even the right to be forgotten. I mean, when we walk through the streets, there are many cameras. How long do those images, how long can they be kept in database? So I think it's an important policy, healthy policy debate within a context like ours on actually how do you protect that data. And I think there's a bill pending in Parliament with regard to data protection. I think those are some of the important discussions that we need to bear in mind.
Dr. Fatma, you want to weigh in?
I think also that it's important to educate the public about the practicality of keeping this information, because not everybody understands that there is a reason behind it, and it's important to have one number. And the other thing is how secure is the information, and also it might not involve everyone. There are people who don't even have IDs. So how do you also ensure that you're going to make sure that everybody is secured within that environment and they have access to that? So the problem is just the practicality of what this is all about. So what will be the outcome of having this number?
Let me comment first on the issue. I think Cabinet Secretary Interior, Dr. Matiang'i, was quite clear that the people who don't, there's going to be very rapid registration. And then the people who don't have the right documents, they're going to make sure that there's very little red tape to enable those people to get the right documents so as to get their Huduma number. And I think he was very clear about that. But to put it in perspective, when when I hear people say the government, it makes it sound like an alien body from somewhere else. And I think I used to say that when I was not in government. But in fact, the government belongs to Kenyans. Everything it does, every coin it uses, every employee of the government is paid for by Kenyans. And it's a government's job to serve Kenyans. The government's job is not to abuse the privacy of Kenyans, but rather to serve Kenyans. Now, there are processes where getting that Huduma number helps secure security of the country, but that does not mean it's there to abuse privacy. Another piece of context is that everybody in this room who has a smartphone, that smartphone, the Facebook that you're using, the Twitter that you're using, the social media apps that you're using are probably, unless you've turned off the various privacy parts, tracking you every day. They know where you go, they know what you shop for, they know where you stop, they know who you're talking to, they know your network of friends, they can correlate, and they do that. And that is part of an emerging conversation on privacy. And I think Kenyans should see that we here in Kenya need to develop our own laws and policies, our own approaches, understanding that the issue of privacy crosses our borders, and that there are far more invasive and comprehensive breaches of privacy that are going on globally in companies that are not domiciled in Kenya. Those servers are not in Kenya, and that they are very interested in how different Kenyans live their lives.
We'll get to this point once we get deeper into the issue of terrorism and how terrorist organizations are manipulating and taking advantage of this space. Before his closing remarks during his State of the Nation address, President Uhuru Kenyatta said, and I quote, "Kenya faces challenges from transnational crimes such as money laundering and terrorism financing." In the same week, a US report put Kenya on the list of money laundering hotspots. The report cited insufficient controls on the circulation of dirty money and the lack of laws against terrorism financing, and it described Kenya's vibrant financial system as a magnet for money laundering. I'll start with Ambassador. Is our financial system a magnet of money laundering?
Well, every financial system, and especially a vibrant and large financial system, is always under threat of money laundering. And Kenya has the largest financial market and the banking sector in the region. So just by definition, it means that there are continuous attempts to use our system to launder money. A lot of this money is not necessarily being laundered by terrorists, but is being laundered by corrupt individuals, fraudulent individuals, and criminal organizations. In terms of the vibrancy of our system, we have in place the necessary laws and regulations on knowing your customer. But those, as many Kenyans who read the newspaper, have not always been followed. And in fact, the big thing on Kenyans' mind being corruption, they know that there are several times over the past where you have found financial institutions and banks handing out money in highly suspicious ways to highly suspicious individuals. So it's a continuous attempt to keep limiting money laundering within the system. Now, this is very difficult for a number of reasons. One is that there are a lot of informal money flows into Kenya. And so it's not just the formal banking system, but there are different systems that are informal, that are sometimes used across borders and are very amenable to money laundering and terrorism financing. And that's why the Financial Intelligence Unit has been upgraded and has been made a much more robust institution. And we're going to be working continuously to building up the strength of that system.
I'll go to Rutere. I mean, are terrorist organizations exploiting this? Because it's not the first time Kenya has been put on this spot. And we have the Kenya Financial Reporting Center that is actually supposed to be dealing with this issue of money laundering. Why are we still on this list? And when will the government agency, handle this issue?
Well, thank you, Dennis. With regard to the vulnerability, I think as Ambassador says, this is an ongoing problem, particularly when you look at the problems of transnational crimes and terrorism being a transnational crime. Now, When you look at the Kenya's counterterrorism approach in the last 10, 15 years, there are a number of things that we didn't do right on these issues of vulnerability, on the policing, use of money, infrastructure, but also there are quite a number of things that we have done correct. And I think it's important to also stress that there have been very interesting lessons that have been learned, but of course there are vulnerabilities with regard to exploitation of the system. And every system will always be exploited by terrorists. So I don't think that's something we can ever eliminate. There will always be attempts to exploit systems.
We are taking a break, but before we do that, Mr. Nicholas, this is a question for you. We have seen terror suspects register mobile phone numbers, dirty cash also coming through money transfer systems and financing terrorism. What is the telecommunication industry doing to stop this or to flag this up with security agencies once it arises? And I'm quoting a recent case of the Riverside Drive terrorist attack where this came out very, very strongly, even in court. And also, we'll get a comment from Dr. Fatma. So, Nation Leadership Forum takes a break. We'll be right back with comments from our panelists. Nairobi, and we are shortly going to be taking questions from the audience. But before we went for this break, I'd asked Nicholas a question about terror suspects registering mobile phone numbers, getting SIM cards, and using dirty cash coming through money transfer systems, and what telecommunication companies are doing to avert this or stop this, or even flag this with security agencies once they notice something is not right. Mr. Nicholas.
Thanks, Dennis. So there are a number of measures that telecoms have taken to reduce or basically eliminate terror financing. And the first one is at the point of entry, we do have very, very stringent measures in terms of just collection of KYC. And therefore, you find that all the customers that we have will have been verified against the government database which is there. And then after that, we allow you to use our service. whenever you go then to transact at any M-PESA agents, one is required to provide or to produce their ID. And you realize that in the recent past, actually, we've introduced a number of technical controls just to make sure that if, for example, you are not the one who is transacting or you give a wrong ID, then the system will not even allow you to transact in the first place. And because of distribution being that wide, having 150,000 or so points or agents where our customers transact, we've taken steps to make sure that our agents are properly trained. So we train them just around AML procedures. We train them in terms of what they should do whenever they are serving customers. And we do this across, across the whole country. And that is also coupled with usual surveillance that we do across the country to just make sure that they are doing basically the right thing. So outside that, we've actually recently introduced a currency scanner where we are rolling out scanners to our agents just to make sure that anyone who goes to transact and they are carrying fake currency, they will be detected. Now, in terms of then the systems, we have put together a very strong AML system which is able to screen transactions on a 24/7 basis. We are able to pick up all exceptions that come through. And of course, we continue to cooperate very, very closely with security agencies, just in terms of reporting any suspicious transactions. So we continue to really invest, just to reduce or basically to eliminate terror financing.
Dr. Fatma, my question to you, because you've written articles on this, and we have seen Al-Shabaab, we've seen ISIS use technology, and we've seen them use young women, especially at the university levels, those who are very literate, to move money around and to communicate with the affiliates in their countries or wherever it is. How serious is this, and how are they exploiting this space?
Thank you very much. I think one thing we have to understand is that terrorism is global. And then the other thing is that finance is the heart of any terrorist organization, because that's how they carry out their business. And they'll always exploit all kind of alternative that exist, whether formal or informal channels. Also through proxies, as you've mentioned, maybe some people who would do secondary roles, like young girls or women who are in this organization. And for them, it's always finding the strategy that is best for them to be able to carry out their business. And one thing that we have to understand is that everybody is part of that possibility of whoever can carry out your business. So young girls, for example, the driving force factor would be probably social construct of marriage. So once that girl gets into that relationship, is also the financial relationship. So do not take care of the marriage aspect, but everything that is involved in that relationship. So I think also it's just a matter of understanding the strategy behind all this and seeing, and it's very serious because this is just exploiting the domestic situation that exists, and of course exploiting the possibility that exists. So everybody, even the gendered dynamic that exists in this relationship of terrorism is also a possibility. And that's why finance cannot be kept as something formal, that the terrorists are only going to use banks, are going to use Safaricom. They can even use individuals, and they can use other means to finance themselves. But what we need to understand is, if we are to counter this group, we need to understand what is the purpose of their financing, how are they getting their financing, and what will be the next stage if we really, block all their financial mechanism through policies, through infrastructure, or through other laws that we have, or even creating awareness with this institution, but also understanding what will be the strategy. Because right now, as you've said, Dennis, there are other proxies. Women also are used to carry this finance around, not only finance, but also make this transaction on behalf of these organizations.
Well, to also give context to the discussion we have, we also have other experts here in the hall, and to help us also give life to this discussion is the Director of Public Prosecutions, Nuruddin Haji, who is in our midst. And as he makes his comments and his remarks, the question that I'll also ask Mr. Haji is, the judiciary has not once or twice, but severally, said that there's weak prosecution once these terrorist suspects go to court, and if the case is not very watertight, they end up getting a small jail sentence to the less expectation of the public. What is your office doing to ensure that you are taking very watertight cases to court so that the sentencing then is not what most people expect out of the suspects, Mr. Nuruddin?
Thank you. I'm not sure whether you could call me an expert, but I'll try my best. Maybe I'll start with the general comments, just to build up on the question that you brought. Issues about cyber security. I think we have to look at issues from a global perspective, because this is about globalization, and we are trying to keep abreast with globalization. When it comes to assuring the public that data is secure, I think that will be a very tall order for any jurisdiction, whether they are developed or better developed than Kenya. And the points in question for me to point out is, we've had issues of WikiLeaks, we have the Snowden issues, we have even Facebook recently having been hacked into. So the question of providing security to data is a question that will have to be dealt with over time. And there is no way, and there is no jurisdiction, whether it's Kenya or any other, that can assure its public that data will be protected fully. So in all jurisdictions, and I think in Kenya too, and I'm saying this from where I came from, countries have both offensive and defensive capabilities to protect their data and their cyber infrastructure. In addition to that, I think the private sector plays a very important and a key role, and that's why we have Safaricom here, for example, that provides some capabilities that the government might not have. Issues on POCAMLA, which, and I'm talking about money laundering and financing of terrorism. First, from my expert here, I want to put it right, that Kenya was only cited as being vulnerable, and we are not on the FATF list of being a jurisdiction that financing of terrorism is rampant. We are vulnerable, and that's a big difference from countries that have been listed as being jurisdictions that are under threat on financing of terrorism. And I think you've seen from the ODPP perspective that we've tried, even in the Dusit case, to take banks that have flouted the rules, not because they were part of that financing, but maybe because they were weak in terms of the mechanism and the capabilities that they have in place. Now, to go to the question that you put about weak prosecution of terrorism cases, you have to understand that terrorism cases, first of all, are very complex in nature. And secondly, when we come about such cases, we cannot risk to have individuals that are suspected, even from an intelligence perspective, out there in the streets, and us sitting down and saying, we will wait for the cases to be watertight. Because when you do that, then you end up having Dusit and Westgate. And that's why we have Potter, the Prevention of Terrorism Act that came in place. And we can have individuals in custody for from 30 days up to 365 days. And to be frank, in Kenya, we have taken into consideration human rights issues, civil liberties, arguments. And if you look at some other jurisdictions, you have more than 365 days to put people in custody. But in Kenya, we only have 365. And in our opinion, it's not even enough, because some of these cases are complex. You have to deal with people who are in Syria. You have to deal with terrorist suspects who are in Afghanistan, in jurisdictions that do not have anything, in Somalia next door, and in other jurisdictions that Kenya do not have, and even other jurisdictions do not have the requisite support and relationship that you can be able to conclude a case conclusively. So, but I have to say, the cases that we have brought, which are still in court, they're taking long, but we are prosecuting them. And I'm happy to say that the ones that we've brought, we will be able to conclude. We have a vibrant judicial system that allows for appeals. And even when you sit down and you know this is a terrorist suspect, you still give them the chance to be able to appeal and have representation. And I think as Kenyans, we should be proud with the systems that we've put in place, even though they're prone to abuse. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Nurdin. A round of applause for him. We also have Mr. James Nicol, who's the Managing Director, Centum Investments. So just to weigh in on what Mr. Haji has said and the general conversation, what are your perspectives?
Hi, how are you? So I'm James Nicol, I'm Director of Security Centum, MD Tribus. I think one of the things we've noticed, particularly of late, is there's a lot of pressure on the government. And then we look at the corporates and what are we doing about it? And I think you'll see there's two real things, particularly when we look at youth and youth radicalization. Unemployment is a big part, and then a sense of wanting to belong. I appreciate that sense of wanting to belong. I joined the army at 16, so I know what it is to want to feel and belong somewhere. On unemployment, we have to fix it, not just as a government, but as a private sector. We have to do our part to bring it in. I think recently you've probably seen that the CS for Public Services, Youth and Gender Affairs, Director General NYS, Dr. Chris Karubi, our chairman, and Dr. James Moria signed an MOU with the NYS so that we can help that employment, so that we can take what has been trained very well by the government and find employment. We then realised shortly after that that the wider youth, the students, the people who have educated and pushed themselves, also need to put into that category. So as Centum Foundation, we're now looking at opportunities there where we can help with that employment, and we can help to, let's not go as far as de-radicalisation, because if we get it right, there'll be no radicalisation. But I don't think that can be left to the government alone to do. It has to be the corporates, and I know very well Safaricom do a lot with the youth. So I think we need to engage the public and private sector better together. We need to encourage the NGOs and see how they can merge that system so that youth can have a chance. Because if you look at all the entrepreneur skills and that's happening everywhere you look, the students are pushing themselves, the youth are pushing themselves, but the jobs and the employment isn't there. So that's for the business sectors, that's for the NGOs, that's for the government to assist. But I think a lot of the newspapers like to write, the government needs to do this. Well, I think as a nation we need to do it, and I think we need to bring those agencies together.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. James. A round of applause for him. I will now shift focus to the face of terror, the deep-seated issues that we have. And this one is for Mr. Rutere. What is feeding into radicalization? Because initially when it started, we thought it's poverty, illiteracy. Then the face changed into something else. Now we're dealing with a monster who doesn't have a face. What are really the deep-seated issues that today we are dealing with, that Iraq is dealing with, that America is also dealing with? Because they are almost all the same. The terrorist attacks in America, the terrorist attacks even in Somalia, where Al-Shabaab is coming from. What are these deep-seated issues, especially in the context of Kenya?
Complexity, because there's no single explanation as to why the young people decide to join ISIS or they decide to join Al-Shabaab. You know, we've talked about radical inequality. We know radical inequalities are part of the environment in which grievances develop, but it's not every radical and equal society that ends up with terrorists. Again, we've talked about ideologies, for instance. A lot of focus initially on ideologies and counter-narratives, but it's much more than ideologies. It's also linked in as we've seen in many other places, to collapsing political systems. For instance, if you talk about Syria, where you have a collapsed nation state, that becomes an important driver for certain political narratives and grievances. So the point that I want to make is that if you're looking for one explanation, that's not a good answer. You've got to look at the different drivers, then you've got to look at what attracts individuals. So you have young people who are restive, who want to belong to something bigger themselves, who have grievances with the society, who feel that the institutions of society may not be serving them very, very well. Then they find someone who actually offers a good way of organizing those grievances into a certain narratives, and religion comes into that as an organizing ideology. Don't forget, this is not new. We've had religion being used in the past as an organizing ideology. So historically, this is not new. But if you have to actually deal with this problem decisively, you've got to look at both the drivers that are structural, the poverties, the inequalities, the grievances, if you can address them. Then you've got to look at the systems, disrupt the systems of recruitment, address the narratives, the ideology. So that means it cannot only be done by the police. It can not only be done by the security agencies. There's a role for government. There's a role for institutions such as schools, county government. Now, when we think about government, we only talk about the national government. So you have to make the picture much more complicated, because you've got to change the society that actually generates this kind of young people.
Dr. Fatma, we've had many girls who've left the country, and I use many in general because they're not correct figures, through Libya joining ISIS. And some of them, I've interviewed a few, they're willing to be jihadi brides. Is this the only reason why they go to join this terrorist organization, especially for the girls?
It's not the only reason, and you have to understand, he talked about it, it's dynamic. So there are so many other reasons, but also you have to realize that there is all these social constructions that happen within a society. And that's why for the girls that you interviewed, if you see how they are easily captured by this organization is through marriage. So if you ask them, why would you go all the way to get married to someone in Syria or Somalia, their reference or their understanding is that utopian explanation of what marriage is all about. So it's not only that, it's also social, economic, and sometimes there are just other factors like peer pressure. I always argue that it's easy to radicalize girls than boys, because girls, when you radicalize one, she'll tell her friend, and that's why they will always go 2 or 3, but the boy is only going alone, because it's easy to just tell the girl, okay, this is an adventure or whatever, and then they go together, because so it's just the whole social relation, the gender roles come in place, the gender relations also come to play in that. The other thing is that sometimes we don't look at terrorism from a gender perspective. So here in Kenya, we just realized about this in 2015 when we had 3 girls disappeared and others were caught at the border. But this is also what the other group is doing. Those violent extremist group, they're always tapping into the things that exist in the society. So in this case also, they try to look at the domestic situation. So, and that's why we had a very vague explanation of radicalization and saying, oh, boys are being recruited to go and fight. So why would they recruit girls? Because the girls are not going to fight, but the girls have roles to play in these organizations.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. Ambassador Kimani, the president in that speech last week said, I want to quote, "Kenya is a country that believes in giving second chances to those who are genuinely seeking to return to a path of legal conduct and to embrace our constitutional values. In this regard, we are undertaking initiatives to disengage, rehabilitate, and reintegrate returnees who had been members of listed terrorist groups." What are these initiatives? Because you sit also as the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. What are these initiatives?
The quick answer to that, Dennis, is that we are at the moment working on a legal framework for disengagement, rehabilitation, and reintegration. Prior to this, there have been a series of pilot programs that have been running in Kenya for returnees, but they have not had a clear legal backing. Now, this is part of a global effort to deal with returning terrorist fighters. And the most important thing you're dealing with at that time is, one, having the risk awareness and the systems to assess risk to make sure that the people who are being rehabilitated are not people who are actually a danger to the public. So the very first priority is not to those people who are returning from Al-Shabaab or ISIS. The first responsibility is to the security of Kenyans. And when that legal framework and policy framework is finally in place, we shall be able to go from end to end, where you shall be able to return, and the DPP will have a role to play in deciding whether to divert you away from prosecution or to go through the prosecutorial process. And so there are a number of tools that are available to the DPP, a lot of tools that are available to the judiciary, and those will be employed in a concerted and coordinated fashion. And I think the DPP has been speaking about that. But before I go on, I want to simplify something, because there's a lot of issues about the complexity of what we're facing. Yes, it's complex, but there's also a part of it that's very simple. That simple part is that right across our border, you have a highly organized terrorist organization that is taking advantage of the inability of Somalia to control its territory. Now, that means they can create training camps that get the Kenyans who leave, or the Ugandans or Tanzanians who leave to join that group, have a place to go and be trained. They can tax all the businesses in their area of control, which is a big part of Somalia. I'm talking about de facto control. So the main threat to Kenya and the main threat to this region is not necessarily what we do or don't do here in Kenya. It is a fact that right across the border, you have thousands of people in a clear structure that intends to perpetrate terrorism. That is the root cause of our threat. And when we talk about terrorism financing, we can do a lot about knowing your customer in Kenya, but at the end of the day, the real anti-terrorism financing measures that need to take place are in Somalia, because we must make sure that the humanitarian aid that goes to Somalis who need the help is not being taxed and utilized by Al-Shabaab. And for that reason, there's a big role for the international community, and especially the countries in the UN Security Council, to stand up and actually enable us to fight that terrorism financing in Somalia, and to be able to give AMISOM the tools that it needs. So a lot of this, yes, there's a lot we're doing in Kenya, but a great deal of the threat is in Somalia. My final point, the issue about unemployment or inequality. Look, I'm 48. People have lacked jobs since I was a child. There've never been sufficient jobs in Kenya. Inequality in Kenya did not start last year. Inequality in Kenya has been here since the thing called Kenya was created. So there's some aspect that is fed by unemployment in terms of hopelessness and perhaps anger. But if we try and say the reasons Kenyans are being killed is because people don't have jobs, then we're really backing up the wrong tree.
As we mull over that, there's something you say, the legal framework that is being prepared. Do we have a time frame for this? Because in Nigeria, when Boko Haram erupted, quickly the government put mechanisms in place, programs in place, enacted things in the law. Kenya's had this Al-Shabaab issue for some time now. Can you commit to a time frame we're looking at in reintegrating these returnees into Kenya? When are we likely to have this in place?
Yeah. Well, Dennis, I've been part of this process now for the last 3 years. And the one thing we've not done is to rush. Because as I said, our primary responsibility is to the security of Kenyans. And so a lot of reintegration programs out there have very poor risk controls. And so we have taken our time in the test piloting process, and it's not been time wasted. It has meant we've trained officers, we've trained offices, we've created a structure that is actually going to be able to start working. In terms of timeline, I think in the next 3 months, and maybe DPP is here and has commented about this, but in the next 3 months, we're going to be going through the public participation phase, getting the perspectives of the different players within civil society, within the community, and we're then going to submit those to Parliament so that we can get the right amendments. And the key is that the policy itself end to end incorporates different agencies, and every agency has specialized people who will be dealing specifically with this matter, having foremost in their mind securing Kenyans from risk. There are other Kenyans who say, are you guys going now to forgive the people who kill us? Are you going to give these people who kill us a second chance? And the answer to that is people who kill Kenyans belong in court being prosecuted to go to prison. The people who want a second chance and are assessed to not have perpetrated great crimes, those people will have another chance.
We'll quickly move to the issue of surveillance. Nairobi and Mombasa have 2,000 CCTV cameras. How effective are these in dealing with security threats that we have, from muggings to carjackings to other bigger security threats when we come back? So Nation Leadership Forum will be back after this short commercial break.
Brought to you by these sponsors.
Welcome back to the Nation Leadership Forum. We're discussing matters of security. We are live from the University of Nairobi, and we have a great panel. We've been discussing issues of terrorism, youth and radicalization, surveillance, and internal security. And before we went for the break, there was a question to Nicholas. We have 2,000 CCTV cameras in Nairobi and Mombasa. And according to the president, they're offering real-time 24-hour security monitoring. To be specific, because we've seen a lot of cameras within Nairobi, how many do we have in Nairobi and how many do we have in Mombasa exactly?
Thanks, Dennis. I think in Nairobi we are about 1,800, and Mombasa they are about 200 something. So that comes to about 2,100. But I just want to go to your question on whether these cameras are effective. And I want to confirm to this audience, and the customer is here, they can talk for themselves, that the cameras work 24/7. For those of you who may have had a chance to go to the command center, which is just here in town, you'll be able to see exactly what is happening throughout. Are the 2,100 enough? For me, the answer will be no. We need many, many more if Nairobi was to become a safe city, and if Mombasa was also to become a safe city. Should we then think of rolling out that project to all the other cities and towns in the country? Yes, the answer would be yes. And I think it's something from a security perspective we should be looking at.
Ambassador Kimani.
There's work right now going on, not only in terms of extending the service, but trying to integrate the cameras that are in private sector's hands. So you'll find many malls, many hotels already have cameras. And so over time, those are going to be incorporated so that there's an entire national network that is not only the one paid for by the Kenyan people, but also paid for by the private sector, so that we're able to cover different areas. If you go to cities that are under the same kind of threat that we are, and I'm talking about London or New York or Paris, you find they have millions of CCTV cameras. Basically, all the private cameras are patched into a national system to allow us to limit the amount of maneuverability that our enemies have in our cities.
In my understanding, Ambassador, and I'd like to engage you on this, when the project was initiated, the idea was not just to have the cameras on our roads and every other place, but to also equip our police officers with special walkie-talkies that had video or photo capabilities, where a police officer can take a picture of an incident and in real time relay the same to the command center, and deployment can then take place from there. We don't have that yet. So when we say that the command center is being monitored in real time, what exactly does this mean?
Do you want me to answer?
Yes, yes.
Let me just comment. So first of all, I must say this is a journey. Of course, those specific assets were rolled out, and basically at the command center, people are able to see what is happening, and they are just supposed to call the nearest police officer to take action. I think that's how it is. But I must say it's basically, for me, work in progress. There has been a lot of transformation which has been required across all the sectors. Also trying to make sure that you've trained the officers properly, and that, of course, the command center is also properly manned 24/7. So for me, it's actually a journey, and I believe we should be able to get there. But you can comment.
Yeah. Dennis, we are, as Nicholas has said, we're in a journey, and there's no one silver bullet. And across the range of protecting Kenyans and our critical infrastructure. And by critical infrastructure, I mean high-value corporate assets, hotels, malls, highly trafficked areas, and key national institutions. We are even in talks with the Architectural Association of Kenya on how new buildings should be designed to limit their vulnerability to terrorism. We are in a generational struggle, not just here in Kenya, but globally. It's been 20 years since Al-Qaeda struck Nairobi. And it's going to be another 20 years before these groups go away. And so from cameras to the skills of the police officers, to the way we create barriers on pavements, on streets, in hotels, we're going to have to harden our society against this enemy. And we're doing what the rest of the world is doing, and it means Kenyans are investing, and I think investing quite heavily, and will continue to need to do so to ensure our security.
Well, we also have the CEO of the National Police Service Commission with us, Mr. Joseph Vincent Onyango, who's going to weigh in on a few comments. Mr. Joseph Onyango.
Thank you very much, Dennis. My comments are around as citizens looking at the very end of the security. I think that first of all, I must state that the National Police Service Commission is concerned about the human resources aspect of the police. That is the well-being of the policeman and woman who are protecting us around the globe. What is important is what are the inputs that we give. Currently, as you may all know, that the curriculum has completely changed, and the police curriculum, the trainings that I undergo are actually responding to the emerging crimes and that kind of issues, so that they are actually very well equipped. My important point is to say the most important ingredients that give results. For police to perform, there are three, I mean, in people management or HR management, there are three important things that we have put in place now. It is the workforce, looking at the totality, looking at a policeman or woman as a human being, as in the workforce, and emphasizing that building skills and competency. And two, there's also the workplace and the environment in which the police work. The kind of results that we expect if we put right leadership in place, which you can see now the government is really focusing on in terms of changing the leadership of the police, the competency expectations, and not just of the police, but the entire criminal justice system, the kind of men and women of integrity that are occupying offices, is that we end up having an engaged policeman or engaged policewoman who are totally committed to their jobs. The second level of results expectation is the public service results. That is, how does the public respond to give police an easy working environment, just like in any other, what we can call developed societies. And third but not least is what we call the public service, the public trust or the social economic well-being of the citizens. And that is where the issues of public trust come in. People can come and invest in this country. The underlying denominator there is the values of the people and the values that we all believe in. Because I think that we have devalued ourselves, and that is why you see in our working environment, issues of the CVE comes in, and easy penetration of like the terrorist group. It is because across not just within the police and the security, but across our system and our cultures, the value system has really gone down.
CEO, before I let you go, because we're going to get questions from the audience, I'm aware that there are expansion plans for the border patrol police units. Can you share briefly, without obviously going into security details, what these plans are in terms of equipping, in terms of manning, because we have the issue of the northern belt and security from the Somali side coming into Kenya. Historically, we've known our police not to be very well equipped, but on this one, because it's very sensitive, what are these plans that you have in terms of preparing, equipping, and managing this unit to be very effective?
I'll answer by saying that the government has really invested quite heavily in that area, especially of border patrol. Number one, there's an ongoing reorganization of the entire police system, that we are having specialized units, especially within the administration police service, and there's a special unit dedicated to the border patrol, and there are really quite a lot of innovative systems and ways and especially along our borderlines. Really sophisticated, both and automated systems along the physical borderlines. And I think most important is a lot of training being undertaken by specialists in border patrol, and we're working very well with the other governments and other jurisdictions to ensure the security, especially of our borders.
Thank you so much, Mr. Joseph Vincent Onyango, who's the CEO of the National Police Service Commission. A round of applause, please. Without any further ado, let's go straight to the audience, and we have a question. You'll kindly stand up, say your name and briefly your question and who the question is directed to.
Good evening. My name is Lynette Nunda. I'm a student at the University of Nairobi. And my question is to the Ambassador Kimani. And it's on the Huduma Number. We have people in the village who don't have access to the dispensaries. Maybe a mother has given birth in the house. She doesn't have a birth notification. How does the government intend to get to this mother in the village to give them a Huduma number? And you get maybe there are no infrastructures to lead them to the Huduma center. How does the government intend to help the people down in the rural center? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. If you cut down the government's job to its true core, the government's job is to count people and to know who they are and where they are, how many they are, what they need. So that problem you've pointed out to is an existing problem. Even if there was no Huduma number, that problem would still exist. So the Huduma number is not here to actually double down on the problem. It's actually here to try and make inroads in counting Kenyans as accurately as possible and registering them as accurately as possible. And by counting, I don't mean a census. That's a separate exercise that's coming up. I think Cabinet Secretary Matiang'i was very clear, and just to reiterate, and I'm not saying your question is not the right question, he says the people who can register, go ahead and register. And those of you who are having a difficult time because you're missing this document or that document, we're going to work hard to lower the red tape and the bureaucracy to enable that mother to be able to register properly. Now, the proof is in the pudding, and I think in the coming weeks and months, we're going to see in real terms whether this is an exercise where we've lowered that red tape, which has been a problem in the past, and so that we enable more Kenyans. As I said, we are not trying to have a Huduma number to exclude Kenyans. We're actually trying to have a Huduma number to include Kenyans so that we are able to deliver services to them properly.
Well, thank you very much for that question. We have another question from the audience.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Shahid Yakub. I'm a member of the Protective and Safety Association of Kenya, as well as the American Society of Industrial Security. There's one thing that it's just a comment that I want to pass through, is that you have to first understand what is terrorism, and terrorism is an ideology. Okay, so the first action or the first thing that you must do in terms of countering terrorism is to counter it from your mind, right? And we know very well that the three key elements that a terrorist uses in terms of attacking us, right, is fear, our fear, their time, and freedom of movement, okay? So we're looking at getting rid of the stereotype-based thinking on terrorism, changing the mindset of the masses, and then countering terrorism. And my opinion would be looking at an integrated thought system, okay, which is inter-religion, inter-race, inter-community, and interstate-based inclusivity and cohesion within ourselves.
Well, thank you very much for that comment. Before we go back to the audience, I want to read one here from Emmanuel Kisiangani from the Institute for Security Studies, who's asking this question. What has been the value of the Kenya-Somali border wall that was initiated in 2014 and which, according to a recent parliamentary report, cost 3.4 billion shillings to construct a 10-kilometer stretch? I guess this is for you, Ambassador Kimani.
Well, first, the barriers that we want to put on the border are not to close the border. They're to actually limit movements away from formal entry points that will allow people to come in and out without a problem. Now, as Kenya has tried to institute this measure, it's found that there's quite a number of settlements within what is called no man's land, between the boundaries, the border between Kenya and Somalia. So it makes this a complicated problem that is being worked on, but the intention is still in place. And if you look across the world at a country that is exposed to the level of risk that Kenya is exposed to, in terms of having a neighboring country that does not have full control of its territory and that has a terrorist organization in that ungoverned territory, then the creation of border barriers is widespread globally. I think we're going to continue with that program. In terms of the amounts of money per kilometer, I do not think that that money has gone to waste, and I think that that fence is going to be built as it should. But there needs to be more work done in terms of resettling the people who are in no man's territory, because this fence is not meant to alienate the people of Kenya of Somali heritage from their relatives and their friends and their business partners across the fence. So we're just trying to be more structured, to be more humane in how we listen to the people there on the ground. And I think in time, that fence is going to go up. In the meantime, without the fence being in place, the Border Patrol is being reformed. They're going to be double the number of officers patrolling the border. They're going to be using different forms of technology and communications. And we're already undertaking many different measures, most that I cannot talk about, to actually continue to try and secure that border.
There's another one here for Mr. Rutere. I mean, the elephant in the room, extrajudicial killings. As a member of the human rights fraternity, what efforts have you put to pressure the government on this issue, and what mechanisms have you put in place, either through legislation or campaigns, to ensure that these things stop?
Thank you, Dennis. And I think that's an excellent question that really needs to be posed beyond talking about policing in terms of the physical infrastructure, beyond the surveillance and cameras. Important as they are, it's very important to also pay attention to who that police officer is supposed to be. And I think the CEO of the National Police Service Commission hinted at that we actually need to think about how do you produce the police officer of the 21st century who can police all these threats, but even more important, build trust, legitimacy, and confidence within the community. Because ultimately, if you're going to do effective policing, you need to have the confidence and the trust of the community. Now, if you have extrajudicial killings, you lose that trust of the community, you not get the information. We know from research that most crimes are actually solved from information from the public, not real time most of the times, important as it is, but crimes mostly are actually solved because members of the public volunteered information. Now, extrajudicial killings or excessive use of force poisons that relationship. And second, it destroys the professionalism of the police service itself, because then police officers cut corners to get quick results. So this is both a human rights issue, but also at the same time an issue of building professionalism within the police service. And I think it's very good that the DPP is here, has been very vocal about it. We have a new Inspector General. I think one of the major expectations is that he is going to put all the measures in place to actually ensure that police are not measured in the same vein with extrajudicial killings going forward.
We're almost coming to a close, and I want your closing remarks, and I will start with Nicholas. In light of telecommunication, digital transparency, and fighting cybersecurity, technology generally, in this issue of terrorism and security, what in the private sector is being done or can be done to make sure that we are ahead, and that governments are ahead, and private sector and businesses are ahead of the terrorists when it comes to technology?
Thanks, Dennis. The issue of terrorism actually cannot be left to governments, and I think all of us have a big, big role to play, from both the private sector to even individuals, and again to government. And for me, I see the next phase of terror being in the cyber, in the cyber area. We have seen in the past where we've seen massive terror attacks, but most of them perpetuated through use of machine guns and what have you. But over the last 2 years or so, we are seeing again small, very unsophisticated incidents of cyber terror. And I think in the next few years, the new phenomenon will be around cyber terrorism. And I think just to land this particular point home, I think it's important that for this particular audience to know that it's only through a cyber terror where you could actually lose millions and millions of people, because we continue, as much as we continue doing digital transformation, then it means most of the systems and most of the service that we offer will be, around technology and around systems. And therefore, from a private sector perspective, we must continue to build proper systems. We must continue to protect data of our customers. And of course, we must continue to do proper surveillance 24/7. We cannot leave it to governments, to governments actually across the world to protect us. We have a big duty.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Nicholas. In 20 seconds, just closing remarks before we go to the DPP for his closing comments as well, Ambassador Martin Kimani.
I'll focus on just the solutions. We've talked about the problem. On Saturday, I went to the Thanksgiving Mass for the Recce officers, those who are serving and those who've passed in the course of duty. And what I told them in my speech is that as long as Kenyans can give birth and raise men like those in the Recce unit, then Kenya is going to be okay. Kenya is now working to prevent terrorism through county action plans that bring together civil society, county commissioners, and county governments. Kenya is undertaking campaigns on radio in different vernacular languages to try and break down that ideology. The interfaith movement in terms of the inter-religious dialogue has taken off with a specific understanding that we have to have platforms that attack the ideology and the mentality of these people. So Kenya is fighting back. Our capabilities are degrading the capabilities of our enemy. And I think they will continue trying to attack us, but I think we are more than equal to the task.
Oh, thank you very much, Ambassador. Dr. Fatuma.
Okay, I think Kenya has a lot of potential in dealing with this issue. However, there are things that we need to work on. For example, we need to really strengthen community security relation in terms of building the trust, because it's only through the community that we can solve this problem, because half of the solution belongs to the community. The other thing is that we really need to create synergy between all the other the actors, whether it is county government, the national government, schools, civil society, the academia, in terms of providing research. And finally, I think the most important thing is information. Information is power. We really need to really upgrade ourselves in terms of gathering that information through intelligence and management of that information. How do we effectively respond to whatever information we receive? Because there's a lot of information, but you see most of the time the problem is really now dealing with that information, responding to that information. And I think if we manage our information, we'll be able to really solve a lot of the puzzle with terrorism.
Thank you very much. Dr. Rutere.
Thank you very much. I think we are on a good journey in terms of transforming institutions of security, kitting, tooling them properly. I think now the next to reinforce that is to transform the culture of security actors, the culture of policing, so that we are effectively policing with the community and not policing community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rutere. And finally, Director of Public Prosecutions, Nuruddin Haji, your last comments?
Thank you. Thank you for the honor. I think the question is, do we as a country have challenges? And the answer is yes, we do. Are we making strides? Yes, we are. A lot of strides compared to other African countries and regional countries around here. You will find very few countries where you have Amnesty International, Mr. Irungu, being included in the police reforms, and being allowed to be part of it. In very few countries in Africa will you have forums like this sitting down and people questioning and asking, where you have the civil society sitting hand in hand, criticizing and critiquing the government, and the government agreeing to the critics and trying to find solutions. We do have, as I said, challenges, but if we were to look to other jurisdictions, and I know Kenyans, we always look to America. In America, they do have police excesses. They have police killings against blacks and black Americans. You have Bensouda being kicked out and visas taken away from them. So challenges are there all over, and we should not look into ourselves and say that we have challenges that are not surmountable. In my opinion, I think we are making strides. We can make better strides. We are going to build the synergies. I know we have, with NCTC, Mombasa County and Garissa County have CVE programs that are being piloted. We are working with them. We are working with the academia. We are working with CSOs. And in my opinion, we've made a lot of strides, and we're going to make even better because of the synergies that we've built over the years. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. That's all we had for you tonight. I wish we had more time to discuss more issues, get more questions from our audience. But I want, first of all, to thank Ambassador Martin Kimani, who's the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. We also had Dr. Fatuma Ahmed Ali, who is the Associate Professor of International Relations at USIU School of Humanities and Social Sciences, also an expert on counterterrorism and violent extremism, and also Nicholas Mulila, Chief Corporate Security Officer, Safaricom. Thank you very much. We also had Dr. Mutuma Rutere, Director, Center for Human Rights and Policy Studies, an expert on issues of human rights and security. We want to thank all our sponsors and thank all this great audience. A round of applause for yourselves. Well, this has been a partnership between Nation Media Group and University of Nairobi, and from the Manu Chindaria Center from here at the University of Nairobi is Good Night. A Nation Leadership Forum will have its 9th edition at a time that will be announced later, but for tonight, that's all we had. Go back to studio.